Well, here we are, my fellow old rollers. Welcome to the podcast. Doctor of Executive Leadership and Leadership Studies, Professor of Leadership, Dr. John Lee, a personal friend and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. And he's going to talk with us today about some things from maybe an academic perspective on leadership and culture. So first off, huge thanks. Welcome to the show. Super excited to have you, John. And tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Harrison. And well, I'm from West Kentucky, over north of Bowling Green. Met Harrison in 1998 at Morehead State University. Both of us were philosophy majors, and so we go way back. He's a dear friend. So I'm holding back strong, not to go down that rabbit hole, but I will later for sure.
We both have a lot less hair.
It's true. It is manifesting in different places nowadays. But man, just oh gosh. So anyway, just a very dear friend, and that'll come out later. I'm holding back on that. But the first, have you had anybody else on your show yet that had the privilege of holding your oldest child when she was 1 day old?
No, you're the only person who. So I've had my instructor on twice, and he and I have obviously a personal relationship. But you're the only person that's been on the show that I have a relationship with, sort of outside of the show or outside of grappling. It's like I said, we've had quite a few of our guests have all said that the outcome for every individual student is often driven by the culture of the mat.
Yeah.
And that culture is mostly driven by the leadership on the mat. So the instructor team, the owner of a gym, different people in leadership positions, your senior belts in judo, yeah. I think that they use the senpai. And so if culture is extremely important for the skill development and safety and just positive outcomes for the students, and leadership drives that culture, then I wanted to explore leadership and how do we manifest cultures? How do we create, curate, and maintain a culture? How do we do that as leaders? And how do we do that if we're not a leader? Because in my personal, situation, I'm a purple belt. So I'm like, the middle run, right?
Right.
Just like that Britney Spears song, "Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman," like that's me. And so the situation that I'm in is, what do I contribute to the culture, and how can I help it so that it helps me, things like that. And wanted to get your take on that because obviously, like in the introductions, you're a professor of leadership.
Yeah.
But through your professorship, you've also had access through your teaching to some very high level sort of cultures of excellence. And
totally,
that's got to reflect itself back and infuse itself into your understanding and your teaching of leadership.
Totally.
So wanted to really, dig deep into not only the academic side, but also, that reflective side where, through your teaching, you've had the chance to be involved with a lot of executives and things.
And so the last bit of poor humor, probably not, but I was going to say, if anybody else has that level of connection with, I'm going to have to challenge him to like a death match, kind of like old school Jean-Claude Van Damme, blood sport sort of stuff.
No, it'll have to be pro wrestling. And I failed in my introduction, which we discussed this before. John has done some amateur wrestling and semi-pro wrestling, and his wrestling name is the Jinja Ninja. And so if you choose to challenge the Jinja Ninja, you should know that he's going to bring it.
And Harrison was my manager at one point. He helped me craft that. And I used to go by Sugar Lips, but my career didn't take off until I went to the Ginger Ninja with Harrison. And we call him the Big H. But
if you know me.
Yeah, no doubt. And he had more hair then. I'll say that. He had more hair, but like a lot more hair. But well, I'm so excited, Harrison, and you know how dearly I love you and your family. And but I just want to throw a few of those things out there. And specifically, jiu-jitsu. Quickly, my jiu-jitsu history. You know, when I was listening to you with Mr. Jiu-Jitsu a while back. I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed that. Same sort of thing, man. I mean, back in the day, UFC back when it was raw. No way. I mean, it was just that was beautiful and pure in its own way. And just seeing Hoist Gracie fight guys, 100 pounds over him, over his weight. That was beautiful and that was special. I mean, it couldn't have stayed that way forever, but. So, we're in high school. That's 96, 94, 95, 96, 97. Guys are starting. If you knew if you knew anything at all, you could basically run the table on people wrestling in your buddy's backyard at high school parties or whatever. So, but two guys I went to high school with, two brothers, the Cannon brothers, they wound up starting their own gym, and so we started out. This is back in. I hadn't seen them. I had trained with them a little bit at like the local gym in my hometown, my freshman year of college, in and out of town, and then. Ran into him a couple years later in grad school and ran into him in a restaurant in my hometown. Like, man, we're going to start next week some new classes. You want to come in? So I was in the ground level of their first official classes. And we started out in like a jazzercise place. And then we moved to a Taekwondo studio. And these stories are just, all these stories coming in. But they wound up they got their own place and started Derby City MMA. On Dixie Highway in Louisville, and it exploded. And so I was gone for a few years, moved to Charlotte, and wound up doing the doctorate through that journey. Came back and walked into the gym, and if I remember right, they had sold it to one of the guys who was in my class, a guy named Derek. Walk in, and I was like, Derek, what the heck's going on? And it just had exploded. I was just so proud, and it was so cool.
So was Nick Albin a part of the gym at that time? Chewy or whatever?
Man, that name sounds familiar. So we're going back 15 years. Yeah. 16. We're going back 2001.
So Nick Albin is who runs Derby City MMA now. And
wow.
he's got a really prominent YouTube channel called Jiu-Jitsu because his nickname is Chewy.
Nice.
And posts a lot of technique videos and also oddly a lot of like philosophy and leadership.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think you would like his channel, and I can personally say I do. I've gotten a lot out of it. I've had the good fortune to train at Derby City MMA a few times, and it's a really good mat. Like the great mat culture, and
totally.
It's a tough mat too. Like you're gonna get serious rolls there, and so a lot of fun. And big shout out to the Chuster for running that. And then we got an OG Derby City MMA guy,
like first class, which is crazy. That's crazy. So I'd have to see his face, Harrison. I mean, that's been almost 2 decades ago. I'd know if I saw his face. That's really cool to hear. And so trained hard for a couple of years and piddled around for another year or so, and so really rusty, I'm sure, but decent enough. And then trained with purple. Didn't train with a lot of black belts, but trained with a lot of purple belts and brown belts back in the day. A few black belts here and there, but it was just really taken off, But something for your listeners. So from there, as you well know, I wound up in the Charlotte area for several years, and then I wound up going back to school, doing a doctorate in executive leadership from a program that's really cutting edge. It's grown explosively. We do a bachelor's in organizational leadership, a master's in strategic leadership, and a doctorate in executive or senior level leadership. I already had my master's at that point, and then went through the doctoral program. And so I was there with executives from all walks of life, and I was kind of outside the box because I was doing all kinds of inner city work with homeless and stuff, but it was really rich. And then wound up, the dean of our program is a retired 2-star Army general that you have a personal relationship as well, General John Barnett. And he was one of my primary mentors, along with several others who'd worked in the political arena and all different arenas. And so the week before I graduated, he called me up and he said, they called me John David there. He said, John David, he said, I want you to teach for us after you graduate. And I'm like,
better than John Dummy, which is what I was always calling you with the D.
Well, you know, I've been called worse, that's for sure. I've definitely been called worse. I'll take that, you know. Man, so it was, and this is going, I think you guys are going to find this interesting. So he told me, he said, yeah, he said, listen, I want to hire you to teach for us, teach online for us. And I was like, well, that's cool, Dr. B. I mean, what am I going to teach? He said, well, leadership, of course. And I was like, oh, okay, I got it. We can do that. And that's how that conversation literally went down. He said, but he goes, here's the deal. He said, we just signed because of our military connections. We just signed contracts with all 4 branches and the Coast Guard, but particularly their special operators. And he said, the first group that's coming on board is going to be the Navy SEALs. He goes, I'm hiring you to teach Navy SEALs. And you'll be teaching at the bachelor's level in our organizational leadership program. And your first group will be almost all naval special warfare. And what happened was I was really immersed with NSW. And so I kind of was, at one point had about 90 advisees that were all naval special warfare, SEALs and SWIC boat operators. And the Green Berets came on board after that, MARSOC, Marine Special Ops, Air Force, Coast Guard, but really it was naval special warfare, and then Army Rangers and Green Berets a lot, and then after that MARSOC, and very, very precious chapter of my life journey. And so was immersed in leadership and in cultures of excellence, high level training, things like that. Have consistently been privileged to work with accomplished executive leaders from all walks of life, and then, you know, traveled pretty extensively across the nation, and lived in a van for a while and had a blast, and lived with SEALs for a while and had a good time. So man, I took down some notes, Harrison, some of the things you sent me to be reflecting on. You got anything you want to ping on real quick, or you want me just to run with it, or anything you want to?
Let's start with maybe an academic perspective.
Yep.
And why is that leadership, let's say culture,
yep,
has such a big impact on the positive or negative outcomes for individual practitioners?
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think intuitively we all know that, but there may be some depth of knowledge that you have from your academic and organizational background that could help to really iron out the details of it, not just for our school owners that might be listening to it, or teachers, but for individuals, because we've all got to pick a school. And I think, you know, once you become a part of a culture, the outcomes that culture incentivizes become the outcomes that you're going to seek, I think. And these are guesses. I'm not a teacher of this stuff. I'm asking your ideas and your thoughts.
Yeah. I was thinking about, and I'm taking mental notes too, everything you've kind of framed so far for our discussion. One of the ways that, now this is John's approach to leadership, but I feel like I've stolen and borrowed from some of the best, you know. One of the ways that I frame a discussion on leadership, I've got 4 or 5 kind of foundational pillars, anchor points that I use, and I always begin a discussion, and I'll frame it in such a way, I'll say, you know, have you ever considered that leadership is utterly universal to the human condition? Every human being, barring some sort of extreme illness or mental handicap or something like that, every human, the greatest thing they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, people are like, I'm not a leader. I'm like, you're leading yourself, whether you've thought about it that way or not, and it's the most important thing you're doing. And every single person has some sphere of authority or some sphere of influence. for good or bad or ugly, or, it's utterly universal to the human condition. It's a universal entry tool. It's a universal platform. It's a universal, it's a code that fits every computer. And the second kind of foundational point that I lay when we reflect on leadership is, and leadership is never divorced. And General Barnett always told me this: leadership is never divorced from context or culture. So you're always dealing with leadership, and you're always dealing with culturally contextually applied leadership.
So explain what it means, just because that sounds complex to me, and I feel like I might know what that means, but I'd like to get, like a real definition.
Yeah. And what we'll do, and we'll take it from there, and I'll circle to that, and we'll sharpen it into the particular culture, which is a mat culture or mixed martial arts and community in the context of training together in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and gyms and things.
Yeah.
So, let's see here. Leadership is never divorced from context. It's one thing to be an effective Army general. It's another thing to be an effective daycare supervisor, or a lineman, a foreman on a construction crew, or a good homemaker. There's nuanced application of leadership in any context. And so it's a moving target in one sense. There are many universals that can be applied, but it's always a moving target in the sense you have to always remember you are dealing with people, and people are complex. You're leading people, and you're always leading. You're not leading in a vacuum. You're leading within a particular culture or context. And, and it's, I don't have to ping on this very long, but, it's one thing to reflect on, let's just say, political leadership in a democracy. It's another thing to reflect on it in a communist setting, or, so anyway, context always impacts how you effectively lead. That's in a relational sense, that's in a cultural sense. And so, your best leaders and your best leadership intuitively, it always has a finger on the pulse of the culture and the context. Mm-hmm. We're always cultural exegetes to some extent. And it's the same way with people, and you're always, you're always reading people and ideally in a healthy and a maturely to connect with them and to help them and to be to serve them and to help them grow and learn and be the best version of themselves. Or some people do it to manipulate them, but so you're always dealing with the culture and the context and the people that are in your context. And
so that reminds me of something that I read in a book called Thinking in Systems.
Yeah.
And it was a math book written by some MIT scientists who were talking about the idea that systems start to create an internal logic, and then the system becomes it's not sentient in that it's thinking, it's not doing that, but it is acting. And to be within a system, you then have to either act within the system or leave it. So to give an idea, Congress never has a very high approval rating, right? Is always pretty low in approval. And that's because the design of that system by our, founding fathers and their genius was to make it pretty inefficient so that it only works well in a catastrophe. Because for the most part, given the sheer volume and number of possible levers that you're pulling anytime you move with the power of the purse, there's a lot of risk there of what economists might call negative externalities, or basically unintended consequences. And I'm using a lot of big ass words, and I apologize for that. I was reading.
That's all he knows, folks, by the way. He's got those don't let him fool you. Those are in a note card. His wife is feeding him those.
Yeah. No, there's a prompter behind the camera. I'm reading it. But to be an individual congressman, you have to operate within a deliberately inefficient system, which means that you have to be inefficient. You cannot be efficient except in a catastrophe. So only when there is unanimity of choice, like everyone thinks X is the right choice, can there ever be efficient movement within a congressional system? And that's by design, because most of the time, if we're moving, we're pulling on levers that we don't even know, and we're creating unintended consequences. So when you say that we operate within context, that sounds to me like we operate within the system. So like if you're a general, you have a particular system in order to be successful at it. There's certain things that you can and cannot do. Just like you said with the other example, if you're a teacher in a daycare setting, you're still a leader, but that's a vastly different set of behaviors that are going to be effective.
Absolutely.
And I know this because I got a 3-year-old that I just had a bitch of a time getting to sleep. If I act like, hey, it's your time to go to bed so I can call Dr. Lee and we can do our podcast, she's going to look at me and be upset, which means she ain't going to go to sleep.
You're right. Yep. Well,
so
well played, bro.
I think what you're saying there with context, it also reminds me of operating within a system. The system creates its own set of incentives and things that can and cannot work. So if you go into Congress with the intent to be efficient, you probably made a mistake in your choices, because you, by design, cannot be efficient there.
Man, well, I almost want to go into complexity leadership and complex adaptive systems. That's for another time. But
we'll bring it back. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's good. It's good. Well, so the big takeaway there, and so now where I want to go is how leadership is never divorced from context. It's never divorced from culture, but good leadership then creates culture.
Mm-hmm. So let's
and so then
dig in because it's not my words. Like, I didn't come to this, but literally every single high-level jiu-jitsu teacher, grappling teacher, professor that we've talked to has said that one of the keys to their success has been their culture. The culture
Absolutely.
that we're a part of coming up, and then the culture that they maintained as a leader. So I want to talk about, that idea of moving a culture the way that you want it, and how to make those choices, and how to act within that and create that.
Absolutely. That's really good. And and it's not these are kind of the universals, these are the foundational things that apply in every arena, in my estimation. I was thinking about creating culture, so some of the basic tools, the way I frame, so we've gone from leadership and universality to context and culture, and now we've come to creating culture. And so I've got about 6 or 8 tools. This is kind of the language that I use. When you think about creating culture, you're looking at language, and particularly narrative. So you're looking at what's that?
So storytelling.
Yeah. So leaders. Ideally, leadership, it articulates and embodies a narrative, a healthy narrative. One of the things we say in leadership, you have to remember you're leading humans, you're leading people, and people are meaning-making creatures. And so, if you have a leader that you admire, there are things that they articulate, there are things that they embody, and they bring that by example. Their words and their actions line up, And so when I think about it in any context, but when I think about creating healthy culture from a leadership standpoint, whether you realize it or not, you're articulating some sort of narrative or some sort of worldview. Within that context or culture, there's some sort of expression of meaning making. And I've got very much some particularity on that, but you're helping people make meaning of their context, and what they're doing, what the mission is, the vision, the values, the goals, things like that.
So helping people to understand what the goals are, or what success within the culture means. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And see, that's all. and I like this language. I like this approach. It's in the form of a narrative. You know, so if your narrative is, you know, it's how you define some of the things I think about. I think about, like, you know, what language are you using? It's language, leadership, and what you're rewarding. You know, what are you incentivizing?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, as you create culture, you know, what are the things that you really think are your marks of success, and what are you rewarding, either tacitly or overtly? And so what you want to do, you know, you want to really think about what success looks like for you. And I think, and I've got some thoughts on that. I feel like there's a spectrum, and that's really fun to think about. It was really fun reflecting on that, but it's kind of like, you know, what's our definition of success within this context, within this culture? How do we articulate that? How do we embody that? How do we model that by example? How do we reward that when we see it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, these are basics, you know, and now that becomes a narrative that is integral to the culture of your gym. And that applies to any tribe, any government, any place. You know, these things are going on, either inherently or explicitly. But good leaders and good leadership, they have some, at least if nothing else, an intuitive awareness of kind of, you know, what's our vision here? What things do we really deem important? How do we model this? How do we set a good example? How do we help others, you know, work towards these goals? And let me see here. And I think, you know, you mentioned a lot about, so for instance, this is really fun to think about, Harrison, but just, you know, just for instance, you know, when I think about this context, let's just say a mat culture, let's just say a jiu-jitsu gym or an MMA gym, you know, you want to think about, like, you know, what sort of respectfulness do you want to have? You know, what sort of culture do you want to have in terms of welcoming new folks, and a culture where, you know, your high level folks can really integrate well with your lower level practitioners. So, you know, all those things are just kind of common sense to anybody that's in the game, but those things are crucial. They're absolutely crucial.
Well, I personally think that what is common sense is not common sense at all.
Yeah.
And so many times, things that should be obvious, I've missed them. You know, I'm the perfect example of every single opportunity that I've had in my life to make the common sense decision. I probably didn't, and a lot of times that was a mistake. But so things that we talk about, just like what you were saying with how do our upper belts integrate with our lower belts? There is such a thing, like the Silver Fox, Carl Provick, calls it a meathead factory, where your upper belts are incentivized to clobber new people coming to the door. And so what you have are 4 or 5 really good purple or brown belts and no white or blue belts, because they run everybody off, right?
Yep.
Now, obviously from a business perspective, that's a problem, because if you can't grow your business, it's going to be hard to keep the doors open for these good, you know, purple and brown belts that you got. But then from, if we were just thinking about self-defense, and this goes back to something that Matt Thornton said, the people that need us the most are the ones least likely to be able to tolerate that environment, because they're not naturally tough.
Yeah.
And so even using the language that from catch wrestling of all places, Joel Bain, freaking monster, who you would never expect to use these words, said we need to build people up, not beat them up. When they come in,
absolutely,
we're creating an environment where they can get better. And if we don't do that, then we run the risk of going into survivorship bias. And rather than creating really awesome practitioners, we're simply selecting for those who are tough enough to take the beatings at first, who are going to be tough no matter what, and who actually need our help the least.
Man,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just, my wheels are turning. I got thoughts for you.
So what we're talking about is that initial, you know, in that initial few months, it's not a soft approach. but it's a building approach. I want to turn you into a killer, but I can do that either by selecting you as a killer if your body is, and mind are ready to take just getting clubbed for a long time.
Yeah, right.
I can build you up piece by piece, and I say as as a purple belt, I help a little bit. I'm not the teacher, but we as senior practitioners can help you into a really good practitioner, and then you can continue that down the chain. So that's kind of a cultural context where we make a choice.
Yeah.
Are we gonna incentivize just being, people who club everybody that walks through the door, or are we gonna incentivize building a community so that everybody who comes through the door has a chance to really become, like a savage jiu-jitsu or a warrior,
Man, what you just said with the mental note I was taking, see, I think the foundational frame here is community. Mm-hmm. And the basic building block of society, the family unit, it's community.
Well, you used the language tribe, and that was cool to me because Matt Thornton, the head of Straight Blast Gym, that's one of the biggest affiliations that exist in jiu-jitsu. Conor McGregor is a Straight Blast Gym.
Oh wow!
Their language is tribe.
Totally.
It's one tribe, one vibe is what they say, and they're talking about community. It goes beyond just. Totally. It goes beyond just pure skill to, like, how do you interact? Like, what's that interaction has a play in the skill too.
Well, so for me, when I think about creating culture within this particular context, I'm like, well, you're creating community. How do you do a healthy community within this culture? And that's what's most rewarding. And I've got some thoughts on that, but I was thinking, yeah, man, my mind's racing. It's fun to think about this, but for anybody that is a mature high-level practitioner in any arena, if they have any degree of leadership maturity or emotional maturity, probably the most rewarding thing that they can do is to take from their expertise and help others learn and grow from it. That's some of the most rewarding, universal across the human condition. Anybody that's just a good, solid person that's really advanced in their arena and they've got a degree of mastery, the most rewarding, talk about servant leadership, the most rewarding thing is to help others learn and grow, And so not only ideally, so I'm just kind of shotgunning cultural things when I think about this particular culture and context. Like, if you look at it, you're building community. You're building a community of lifelong learners. You're building an integrated community of multi-level practitioners. Anytime, any expression of healthy leadership is going to be authentic. It's going to care for people. It's going to connect with people, inspire people. And so what happens, man, is the best, anybody that's listening to this, if they really were to sit down and take some time and look at what would they define as the most rewarding parts of their lives, it's some expression of giving back. It's some expression of helping the greater good, serving others. They're just, that's just universal. And so see, you build these things. These are all things that apply in that culture, and so when you've got these things flowing, you've got a growing learning community, multifaceted community, multi-level community of practitioners. And that's where the sweet spot is. And so now in John's mind, I had this thought, and this was so fun to me, Harrison, so powerful. Because I was thinking, how do we define success? And it dawned on me to present just a thought, and maybe to expand the aperture of how we look at success. So I would define success in this context as healthy bedrock. I would say healthy community, and I'm talking financially as well. You have a healthy, welcoming community. You're going to grow, and you're going to do better financially. But also, you're going to your level of skill within this domain is going to improve. If you've got healthy people and healthy leadership that are pouring into those who are coming up, the lower level practitioners, it just makes sense all the way around,
Well,
and so
I think
go ahead.
There on the the skill, and we might even say competitive zone, because jiu-jitsu and grappling, we have competitions. As things grow, if we have that healthy environment, then some would say that a rising tide lifts all ships.
Totally.
You do have the case of like the Silver Fox, kind of meathead factory, but because maybe they have 5 to 10 practitioners and that's all that they have to work with, they're not being exposed to the different angles that every natural person will take. So grappling and jiu-jitsu expresses itself differently through each person.
Totally.
The unique challenges that I present in a role versus the one that you present in a role force each person to have to gain a different experience and a different acumen through that exposure. So
that's a good point.
One element that comes to mind, we had a teacher named Seth Smith on, and he talked about some of the new modern lapel-based guards. Initially, when he saw them, he wasn't interested in them. He just said, that feels gimmicky. I'm not going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
His students, a few of them, got pretty good with it and started practicing it. And all of a sudden, they were challenging him with it. And then he said, okay, I can look at this, and this is obviously good that I'm being challenged, but moreover, I got to help my students. So he started studying the modern lapel-based guard systems, which have now become a part of his game. That wouldn't have happened, and he wouldn't have gained that ability if his students hadn't presented him with the challenge of it. And then as a teacher, he wanted to be good enough to be able to help them. But just because they were doing it, he was already getting a valuable training stimulus, which was something that is outside of his comfort zone, and it was a challenge. So he had to find a reaction to, right? So what you're saying about this community, and like I said, a rising tide, it's a cliche, rising tides lift all ships. If you invest in the community, it would appear that the community will also invest in you, incidentally, not necessarily on purpose.
Man, I had this thought came to me in this vein, and I made a note because I wanted to mention if it fit the flow of the conversation. Let's just say you got 50 people in the gym. Let's just say you're at 50, whatever. And so on a given night, you've got 30 training, and you've got X amount of black belts, and you've got the whole spectrum. And so this is poignant to me, and I've been reflecting on this for several years across contexts, leadership wise. There's always there's like a spectrum of ability. And so like somebody that might really, for them, they might max out at a half a blue belt, but they might be a real badass banker. yeah, like me, minus the banker, minus the money, minus the money. But but man, the Ginger Ninja, he rides, but so the thing I was thinking about is it's always interesting to recognize that the person that might be having the best role might be that one stripe blue belt, but they're maximizing the skill level that they've got, and and the black belt might be half-assing it, at 65% and wasting his or her ability, and the blue belt might really be. And so but the thought that came to me was, and because this is, in my mind, this is a healthy community and expression of success. If all these folks are in the same room together, and let's just say that one of your practitioners been there for several years, and then he or she brings their 22-year-old child who has Down syndrome, and Billy or Susie has been rolling for a year, and everybody knows that Billy or Susie is the lowest level student in a physical capability sense in the whole class, in the whole gym. And one night, Billy lands an arm bar, a legit arm bar, and the whole gym stops. And I mean, everybody cheers, and like, whoa, way to go, and you tap or I tap, hey, nice work, but everybody just, but you feel that, you feel, and the black belt is just as excited, and it's things like that that speak to me of real healthy culture, where everybody gets it. And so something, go ahead.
To counterpoint that as well, it's not good just for, that practitioner who is at, what we'd say the lowest level of physical ceiling.
Yeah.
Matt Thornton, once again from SBG, one of the big points that he made is that a 25-year-old professional MMA fighter should and must be able to get good training from roll with a 50-year-old soccer mom.
Absolutely. That's excellent.
The sensitivity that is required to downregulate, to be able to move at the level of someone whose movement is much lower than yours in terms of, athletic ceiling. Turns out that being able to downregulate also makes you better at upregulating. So when you step into the cage or the octagon or the ring with another 25-year-old raging bull, as you see them picking up the pace, because you have developed that sensitivity, by going down in pace.
It's really good. You've
also learned how to go up in pace. And so you can meet, this person for one. So it's not good just for the person who has a low athletic ceiling. There is a technical case for that 25-year-old pro MMA fighter to accelerate his or her learning if they can figure out how to do it with some, the example was a 50-year-old soccer mom, but really it's just someone with a much lower athletic ceiling. So we all need those high impact roles, the ones where, let's say I'm a 6 or a 7 on the athletic scale. I need to be rolling every now and then, or even a lot with someone who's also a 6 or a 7.
Right.
I also need to be rolling with the 1s and the 2s and the 3s. And
right.
The 10s.
And the 9s and the 10s, yeah.
They need to be rolling with me. And if we're both getting good training because of that sensitivity that we're developing, by that logic, that accelerates both of our learning if we're willing to do it.
That's really good. That's really, Harrison, I wouldn't have thought of that. That is such a great complimentary point to that. That's really good.
I like to think in some small way that I'm, probably the greatest human that's ever lived.
Go ahead and mute this thing real quick, would you? And we'll, I'll comment on that, but I'll wait. I'll just wait.
But that's Matt Thornton. That's not, those aren't my ideas.
Yeah, but that's good. That's really good.
Him.
Well, okay. So see what we're doing right now in real time, we're reflecting on this leadership-wise, What leadership does, ideally, is it then takes this awareness and cultivates that. And so you build that into your culture. And so for instance, you model that first of all, wherever you're at on the spectrum. And then also you help model that for others, and you help the 9s and the 10s integrate with the 6s and the 7s and the 1s and the 2s. And really more things are caught than taught. As many things are caught than taught. And I think that's just true. And, but these are the things, like when I look at, these are kind of the intangibles that are really tangible. These are the things that create culture at the end of the day. Yeah, I got more notes. I'm just kind of looking here, but.
Well, while you look at your notes, I'm going to look at mine to make sure what we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to get with you was to define what a culture of excellence is.
Yeah.
And then from a leadership, or even, like, I wouldn't say like top level, but even mid-level, but, all levels, how do we create cultures of excellence? Because I've been a part of one, which is, you know, like when I was in flight training, I was part of a flight school, and I can definitely define that as a culture of excellence, but I don't have the language on it to be able to repeat it. And there are a lot of gyms and a lot of mats that are cultures of excellence. But you know, let's say, you know, you're a new teacher, or you want to take these pieces and try to make your mat better. How do you create a culture of excellence that's going to help you to do that? Because I think there's only so much as a teacher or as a leader that you can do. Just like what you said, there's more caught than taught.
Yeah.
So the culture is going to do some of the work for you, maybe even a lot of the work for you, as it seems to appear. So what is a culture of excellence, and then how do we do the work of creating and maintaining it?
It's fun to think. You know, I hadn't thought specifically on creating a culture of excellence. So I'm just gonna spitball here. Well, you know, like on the one hand, you know, you got
spitball.
What's that?
You're a professor. You're not allowed to spitball.
So, you know, cause it's just.
Oh, I teach Navy SEALs and whatnot, but I'll just put this one out.
Well, you know, the on the one hand, everything we've said so far, in my estimation, it's not all the pieces of the puzzle, but it's several pieces to a culture of excellence. You know, building community. You know, so take all these things as kind of bedrock things and building on that. When I think about it in this particular culture, in this particular context, you know, you're developing people. And so I think a culture of excellence, a big part of it's being built on excellent people. And I think a lot about being lifelong learning practitioners. And so I'm trying to think about the things. On the one hand, I got to think about the things that are irrespective of where your athletic ceiling is. You know, so I'm not necessarily measuring a culture of excellence by how many black belts you got, you know, how many, you know, whatever, all that stuff. But that's part of it. What's that?
How many world-class competitors? Yeah.
I was going to say, and so in my mind, it seems to me like you develop an excellent culture and you do it through excellent training, excellent people. And I think what that will do, that will eventually, law of averages, it'll bring the higher level competitors that'll be integrated into that culture, and then that'll be in the mix as well. But in my mind, you know, really, it's about, when I think about it, when I think about an excellent culture, I definitely think about caring people, and I think about lifelong learners. And again, I'm applying it. It's very fun in the moment to apply it to a mat culture. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, everybody's learning and growing. And so there's a sensitivity there for those that are going to do that faster, and those are going to do that slower. And for some people, they're really all in, and others, it's just a, you know, basic self-defense, or, you know, just letting off steam or whatever. But
which is a totally, you know, that's a fine goal too.
Absolutely. So to me, the real excellence is to have an integration of all these things in the room and to have everybody flowing together, you know, to have that flow. And so that just, you know, that's just good coaching. That's good awareness. That's good leadership. You know, but the basics are, you know, obviously you need to, you know, you need to train well. And part of that is respectfulness. And, you know, you establish your culture. If somebody's kind of an idiot, you're like, hey man, listen, we just need to talk to you now. You know, we really don't operate that way here. You know, I know you got angry there or whatever. And, you know, so anyway, just normal stuff. We've all seen it, all been around it. But at the end of the day,
you can't come on the mat with a giant ringworm.
Check. Glad you said that, because that was really strongly in my notes. The ringworms.
What you're saying there, the Silver Fox, he said that the pillars that his academy, he doesn't use the word gym, his academy built on are world-class instruction, a friendly and open environment.
Yep.
and an extremely clean, physical environment.
Cool.
So those things, what you're talking about, what you said, like, it sounds like it flows very, very closely with what, his academy culture that he's trying to cultivate is. And I'm not shilling, like, for everyone to go train with the Silver Fox. I'm saying that
Right.
that's a repeatable formula.
Right.
Like, if you get those three things right, then
Right.
things, are probably going to happen.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, whatever language I put on it right this moment, I mean, I'm not reinventing the wheel on anything.
Yeah.
The basics are the basics for a reason. I tell you what, though, just as I'm thinking about it, Harrison, for my taste, just working with just where I'm coming from. So I'm going to talk about the high level leadership and some of the things I see in that.
Yeah.
I think that, so now I'm going to talk about high level self-performance or whatever, improving your ceiling. So individuals improving their ceiling and then improving working together, for my taste. Okay, so you're developing excellent culture of excellence, and I'm saying you're developing excellent people. So in terms of people excellence, I think there ideally is a degree of self-awareness. It's lifelong learning and it's self-awareness. And so this is both, intellectually or emotionally, but also physically, also athletically. Your best leaders have a reflective capacity and a reflexive capacity. So they can think about how they're thinking. So people need to be able to think about how they're training. They need to be able to know their body. They need to be able to know their strengths and weaknesses. They need to be able to operate within their own orbit where, I've got some go-tos. My guillotine's stronger than my arm bar.
Mm-hmm.
But so, there's an awareness where you can intentionally, you're aware of your strengths, you're aware of your weaknesses. And so you're always trying to round out your weaknesses.
So just for the show's sake, say armbar again.
Armbar?
Yes.
Yeah. Check.
We had ZombieProof Kent Peters on earlier this week, and he's from Nova Scotia, and so his pronunciation of armbar was vastly different than yours is mine.
I tell you, the great thing about Canada, the great thing I've always said about Canada, it's close to America. That's the greatest thing. No, I love Canada. I love Canada. That's my joke about like Ohio and Tennessee. The greatest thing about Ohio? What's that? What's close to Kentucky? But I love the Ohio. But I would say the biggest single thing I would say for developing excellent people, which I think in turn bears just by definition bears dividends for building excellent culture. Excellent people will have excellent culture, and that's just the truth. And so, folks that are excellent, I think self-awareness. If you can encourage people to self-awareness in like an athletic sense, and so where they can find their optimal learning capacity, how they learn, how they flow to develop themselves in the journey. And then from there, so a self-awareness and an others awareness where they can watch and learn with and from others. And in my mind, those two, when I see high leadership across the board, there's a self-awareness and an others awareness. And so somehow applying that in a MAT culture, it's fun to think about that. I need to sharpen that language a little bit. You got anything?
Yeah, when I interviewed Lachlan Giles, I've interviewed him twice, and for the listeners, I have to apologize because we had some serious audio issues with the first one. And so we came back and he was gracious enough to come back. Cool. He's a phenomenal competitor, just a great guy, just a great guy. But what he was saying when you were talking about the self-awareness and self-directed training, he was saying even with a teacher, and this was in the first one, so the audio that did not make it, and so I'm paraphrasing what he said for the sake of the listener because I heard it, and it was very important.
Yeah.
A lot of our training is going to be self-directed because we don't have a tremendous number of hours with our instructor. even if you're training a lot, it's still not a whole lot of hours in terms of like the total hours per week. And so what you were saying in terms of self-awareness, he basically was using it in terms of the training choices that we make. So just like you said, okay, my guillotine's better than my armbar. If you want to be a high-level competitor, you're going to need to have both at a pretty darn high level, but one needs to be razor sharp.
Yeah.
And so you can self-direct your training and say, I'm going to work on my guillotine or I'm going to work on my armbar. You know, the armbar is the lower hanging fruit in that if I bring that up, a weak point may have improved. But the guillotine might be my reason, meaning that if anybody gets their head, you know, within a bent arm's length of me, that's a lights out condition, right?
Yeah.
And so he said that he feels that a good majority of your training is self-directed, meaning that your teacher doesn't run it, you run it. But you also need your teacher to look at you from the lens of experience and say, okay, you're really good at guillotines, but that one, you know, setup that you're using, quite frankly, is not going to work for your body type. So your energy is going to be best spent with a different setup. So if I were you, I would work on it this way. So that sounds kind of like what you're saying in just a purely, you know, within the context, to use the language of this discussion, the context of a set of moves, you're self-determining what you're working on, but then you're also going to have the voice of experience to help you to be more efficient in the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that can also come not from your instructor, because I can tell you many times someone who was a lower belt than me exposed something in me that I had to work on, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. So you have to have the self-sensitivity, but then that external sensitivity is not just for, you know, the voice of experience. It could be just for the white belt who has a killer guillotine, and suddenly you got to get, you know, like you got to get better at your preemptive or hopefully not late guillotine defense.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Billy just tapped you out there, you know, so it's good there, but been there, but
Yeah,
man, that, you know, and well, okay, like I'd point out, see, because I know you're really, I mean, you're one of my dear friends, you know, but see, you've got that self-reflective capacity. Well, that just exposed. I was training with, you know, see, you're doing that, you're modeling that.
Well,
you take it for granted.
That's not necessarily like a Harrison thing. That's an everybody thing. If you got you know, schooled by somebody that's shouldn't be as good as you, that's gonna hurt your feelings, and you're gonna go, I got to deal with this. You know, like Jiu-Jitsu has a very linear feedback, you know, structure. Meaning, if what you're doing is working, it's very clear, and if what you're doing is not working, that is also very clear.
Man. Well, you know, and I think about that, and you know, it just comes with time. You know, people have to be able to think. I remember, and this still sticks with me. You know, I remember the guys telling me, so, you know, when you're rolling, like, you know, envisioning what would Hoist Gracie do right now? But it was a reflexive capacity, like this is going on. It's a chess match. You know, it's a chess match in so many ways. And so if folks can, as they grow in their craft, they ought to be able to, they're thinking, the wheels are turning all the time. They're thinking, you know, and so they're thinking within whatever tools they've got at their disposal, given where they're at on the journey as a practitioner. But just that capacity, it's huge. It's huge. And then also, if you can really work well with others and learn well from others and say, man, Harrison, you're really good. Man, how do you do that? Show me now. Work me through the nuances of your guillotine, because it's crazy, man. You get me every time with that. Now, what are you watching for? What are the nuances there?
Yeah.
And so then it's well, they cut out. I think you said, John, you're so amazing.
Most people are like, hey, you're really screwing that thing up that you're trying to do. Let's just either stop doing it or let's show you how to do it right.
I'm throwing you softballs here, old friend. I'm giving these softballs right over the plate for you, man. Just trying to, you know. But so, you know, man, those are kind of the basics. See, I'd plug that into any context. I'd be like, well, reflective capacity, reflexive capacity. I did think of something while you were talking.
Okay.
In terms of, well, the biggest nowadays, especially in the age that we live in, the single greatest capability you can have is the ability to learn. If you can only have one, what's the one meta skill? It's the ability to learn. Mm-hmm. And now, everybody has the best in the world at their disposal on YouTube, and so really the one indispensable is for all of us is just to be lifelong learners and to be continually humble and teachable and cultivating our own personal ability to learn. And then also enjoy the journey of learning with others and learning from others. Any excellent culture has that. And so somehow the mastermind principle of that, when you've got a lot of good practitioners that are doing that, that will rub off. Everybody else will catch that. They'll catch that. And so, you just inject that DNA and those ingredients into the culture, and you're aware of it. And sometimes you really, you've got your language handy for the language or the metaphor that you use, the narratives that you use to help impart that to your folks. A metaphor is a big one. What metaphors are you using? A good metaphor, leadership-wise or culture-wise, goes a long way. And so, we are all the time making meaning. And so when you've got a good metaphor at the whole gym, whatever that would be. But I always watch for the metaphors that people use, and I watch for how helpful, how when the light comes on, because, I get it now. Mm-hmm. You just watch for those that are really effective with people. And again, that varies. Some it's effective with others, and some not as effective. But a good metaphor goes a long way, man. Long, long way towards culture.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm embarrassed because I can't think of the book that I read that told this quote, or that gave me this quote, but it said that a good deal of leadership is storytelling. Mm-hmm. And by going back to like the history of human culture, storytellers have always had kind of a special place in tribes and communities, and so they're almost the holders of, or the spreaders of, the important values that the community and so what you were saying there, like the metaphor is telling the story, like let people know when they come in what's important here, what is meaningful. Is it important in the name, like in the mold of the Silver Fox Meathead Factory? You're going to be a killer, and anybody who comes through the door, you're going to let them know that they came through, right?
Yeah.
Or is it that when someone comes in, we want them to feel welcome?
Absolutely.
If a woman comes in, we would want her husband to be okay with the fact that she was training with us. If
absolutely
someone comes in with his 15-year-old kid who wrestles 9 months out of the year, and then during the summer break he comes in and trains with us to get different grappling training, we want the father to know that the kid's safe, and the kid to know that they're part of a place where we understand your goals. We're not expecting you to become like the best jiu-jitsu person. You're grappling with us. We're going to take advantage of the new stimulus, but we're going to give you one too. So telling what you're describing there of telling the story is like, as someone comes through the door, we're both verbally but also physically and culturally telling the story of the culture, so that they integrate or don't integrate.
Absolutely. Well, and you articulate and you embody a story or a narrative, and if those things are in dissonance, then it's bullshit. It's like, well, you're saying this, but you're not living it, But, that's what a healthy culture does.
I think a lot of my personal instructor, he's an introverted guy. He's a quiet guy. So he's not telling a whole lot of verbal stories, but through his actions, and his grappling, the way he the way he acts and rolls, he's also telling a story physically and through demonstration. So you don't have to be a verbal storyteller.
Totally.
You can be a physical and cultural one too through your actions.
Absolutely. Saint Francis of Assisi. He said, preach the gospel all the time. If necessary, use words. So whatever your message is, your life should be the main vehicle of it. But
that makes a lot of sense to me. I like that. I like that metaphor.
yeah, it's good. Yeah, no, I got that. I got a few in my pocket. You collect them.
Yeah,
man. Now here's.
Go ahead.
Real quick on that, and hold that thought. I want to hear your thought. One of my leadership mentors, the mentor, the senior leadership fellow over our entire program. So the guy that former physicist but the top leadership mentor over all of us in the leadership program, Dr. George Walker. He says our leadership program was built on a study that he partnered up with the Carnegie Foundation to do for doctoral education for the 21st century. Man, Harrison, one of the best things I've gotten from him, and something about 2 or 3 minutes ago triggered this. It was something about metaphor and things, but he said, you really haven't established mastery in any arena, in any context, until you can take your mastery from that arena and apply it across arenas. Or you can take the core of it, or you can take the best stuff you got and make application outside your domain. Now where I'm going with that is in the course of this discussion, as you develop leadership wise and as you develop as a jiu-jitsu instructor or practitioner, or as your culture develops, what will happen is what mastery will be able to do is to take the best things from that culture and apply it in other domains.
Mm-hmm.
And so what will happen, and it doesn't have to be all touchy-feely kumbaya stuff, but what will happen is you'll have just legitimate mastery. Will be able to occasionally take a jiu-jitsu nugget and apply it to life.
Mm-hmm.
Or to apply it in a way it's inspiration. You know what I'm saying? And so that's just what mastery leads to. And so there will be those moments that will be deeply meaningful to the community, where they'll actually take from the culture there, and they'll draw from it, in hard times, or there's just different.
Well, to give a direct example of that applies not only to jiu-jitsu but to this podcast.
Yeah.
The thing that jiu-jitsu gave me was a willingness to suck, because I was not good at all. I'm not joking when I say I'm the worst person to walk through the door. And I really thought my instructor was just going to kick me out for being so bad. I was that bad. It was god awful. And so I made the decision that I'm just going to keep coming until he tells me I got to go. Like, I'm just embarrassment to everybody on the mat. You got to leave. It's just this ain't for you, right? So when I thought about, podcasting, say, I am the white beltest podcaster ever. Okay. And I know that. Every day, I basically do what I did in jiu-jitsu, which is I keep asking people to talk to me. And then if they don't, I ask somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll roll with a black belt and I'll flub, and that's just how it is. But I'm going to try, and it took 5 years for me to be what I would call like the world's okayest purple belt, right? So I have to have that. I have to be willing to accept a 5-year timeline in this exploration to have any level of what I would even say would be acceptable competence. Okay. So jiu-jitsu freed me from the idea of being a hard charger, because coming from aviation, failure is not a thing that's accepted. You can fail in training, and we want you to struggle, but once you've left training, that's over, right? Like you get a basically a 1.5 year long period to not be that great. But within that 1.5 year period, you better become really great, because that's over. Jiu-Jitsu kind of freed me from the burden of that sensation of I have to be great at everything really fast. Because if I had that, I couldn't have done it. I would have had to have quit, because it just did not come fast for me. It does not come fast. I admire and envy those students who can, their instructor can show them something and in one pass they get it. And I know if you got, I trained with a guy who's just like that. Show him one time and he can perform it real level. That ain't me. It ain't me. Like it takes me 50 passes. And so I have to do a whole lot of outside study just to understand what my instructor is trying to show me, because I don't see it well, right? But I had to learn to be okay with that. And so this podcast journey of trying to accelerate my learning and strengthen my longevity, I also accept that I'm a white belt at it, and I'm just going to do as best I can, as long as people will let me talk to them, right? I don't know when that stops, but I'll just keep going until it does.
Well, it triggered a thought, old friend, on I think because it was a good thought. I was like, I think part of
So who you calling old?
I didn't stutter there. I think the comms are good. I think the audio is good on this. But see, you 40, I'm 41. I'm going on 42 now.
Turned
39.
June 1st. So what is that? A week from now?
Okay, cool. I'll be sure and
I expect
check in with
Doc.
Definitely, man. About 3:30 in the morning on your birthday, I'm gonna blow your phone up. Okay.
I know you're getting paid, so I expect something real nice.
No doubt. I'll get you what I got you last year. How's that?
I'll look for it in the mailbox.
Yeah, totally. The man, as you said, something dawned on Harrison. I think another facet of a culture of excellence is the long game. And it triggered when you said it's a long. I'll tell you what, man. People are like, hey guys, look, listen, tap out now, and live to roll another day.
Well,
just keep
further than just tapping. And you're onto something, because Lachlan Giles talked about Craig Jones, who he trained with when Craig was a purple belt. Now, Craig is a world-class competitor. I think he's the top 170-pound grappler in the world.
Wow.
He's certainly the best leg locker, if not one of the top three. He's a phenom.
Wow.
But Lachlan, who himself is a phenom and a world-level competitor, said that training with him when he was a purple belt, he would let you do almost anything to him.
Yep.
And he was like, you gotta be a little firmer here. Like, we're rolling. But Craig was just feeling every position that people wanted to put him in, and then using zero of his athleticism at that time, and just purely developing skill and sensitivity. And then later, when that was all in place, then he started turning on the athletic side, and suddenly he was a world beater.
Man,
and that was a long game, because he spent, to get to purple belt, that's a few years.
Yeah.
Skill acquisition. You know what I mean? Just purely skill acquisition, not like trying to win, because he wasn't trying to win in the gym much at all.
Yeah, man. You really want, ideally, again, as individuals and just in a general cultural sense, you want people that are going to be lifelong learners, and you want practitioners beside you that are 65 years old, 70 years old. You really do. Somebody that just loves the game, and they keep, that's, so there's the, just keeping the, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and in every way, in terms of your personal development, your lifelong learning. I think somehow, if you've got that awareness within your culture and you're modeling that, and again, you've got a great story there to illustrate that. Great example of somebody that embodies that. Anyway, that's a good one to play with. It's a long game on so many levels.
Well, I think that's actually for tonight a really great place to pause this conversation. And there's some more that I want to get to with. So I'm going to ask you to commit to coming back on the show, so that we can get some more from you, because I think you've shared some great ideas and some things that we can all take to both our training, but also our teaching and expressing the culture. So for my old roller nation, if somebody wanted to learn more about you or your teaching, how would they reach out to you or learn more about your program?
Man, well, I'm on sabbatical working on the family farm, as you know, for a few months, and I'm really enjoying that. And so it's the leadership program is the University of Charleston, West Virginia. It's all online. We're one of the top emerging leadership programs in the eastern half of the United States. We got about 1,400 students, bachelor's, master's, doctorate combined. The bachelor's is organizational leadership, master's is strategic leadership, doctorate is executive senior level leadership. We're very, very user-friendly, very military-friendly, everything I've mentioned. So basically just Google University of Charleston Leadership Program, and if there's anybody that reaches out to you, just connect them directly to me if they need a point man. Be glad to do that. And so it's great. The thing about leadership, is you can take the basics and apply it within your context, and so you should be able to do that pretty quickly. That's the universality of it. So it's a great complementary degree. And I'm not recruiting. I'm just saying, it really is a very, in one sense, because I've done this, and I'll be quick with this last thought. But people say, well, what do you do with leadership? I'm like, well, what don't you do with leadership? Let's reframe this here, because actually leadership's everywhere, and you won't do a lot of things unless you've got good leadership. So what you need to do is you bring your baseline, you bring your existing tools and baseline skills to the table, and then the leadership journey refines what you bring. And you pick up nuggets. It's a direct parallel to the MAC culture. You're with other practitioners and you're sparring back and forth, so to speak, and you're gleaning from their tools and some of their best stuff. And, same parallel there, same thing.
Yeah.
So leadership's fun like that. So yeah, just Google us, easy day.
Well, very cool, John. Once again, on behalf of the Old Royals, I can't thank you enough. I think you really shared a lot of great stuff that we can all use to improve both our journey and the journey of our training partners. And, it's not just like you said, not a bunch of, lovey-dovey kumbaya stuff. It actually improves the outcome even for competitors and things. When you're taking ownership of your own training and the leadership portion of how you fit into a culture, even when you aren't exactly the leader of it. But by being a part of it, you get to push the needle a little bit in your own way.
Totally. Absolutely. And push it towards the greater good as best we can, helping others and improving ourselves. And so
get better and tap a bunch of assholes.
Yeah, that's no doubt. Ginger Ninja. You gotta start training.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Cool.